Let me again thank Francois de Roche. That was a brilliant beginning. As someone who is involved in Quran manuscripts and codices, I can't tell you how much new information there is in that paper. Let me then, without further ado, while we're getting settled, introduce our second introducer. So we have San-Young Yu, also known as Elizabeth, who is going to introduce Julia Gonnella.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. She also directs the Islamic section of the Syrian-German excavation on the citadel of Aleppo. She has so many publications that I cannot discuss them all due to the given time. Some of her popular publications include Angels, Peonies, Fabulous Creature, The Aleppo Room, Berlin. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Julia Gonnella, who will speak to us today on the stucco of Samara.
And so generously with providing access to the objects and the informations. Not many places in the world have captured people's imagination, such as the city of Samara. Staggering, luxurious palaces, vast, sumptuous pleasure gardens, majestic mosques of enormous size, game reserves, race courses, polo fields, all this belongs to the grand lore of this extraordinary town, which served as the capital of the Abbasid caliphs for 56 years only, between the years 836 and 882. After this, the caliphate returned to Baghdad. Samara then was more or less abandoned and became, as the medieval historian Yakut put it, a ruin, a waste at the sight of which the viewer takes fright. Despite its short-lived descendants, Samara became the paradigm of majestic power and extravagant taste. Its ambitious size and its breathtaking achievements became the focal point of all future imperial projects undertaken in the Islamic world. Visually speaking, it therefore often comes as a little anticlimax when dealing with Samara stucco, at least for ordinary visitors, which, as we always have to remind ourselves, only survived in piecemeal and never in its full contextual beauty. Even though the 3 panels of the Doha Museum, which serve as the starting point of my paper, are actually very well preserved and of particular high quality, they only betray in minute detail a section of what has originally been a very complex and truly remarkably interior design. The panels are thus not so much objects in the classical sense of the word, as most other objects here under discussion, but rather mementos. Despite this lack of visual prominence, of course, Samara stucco represents one of the core subjects within the field of Islamic art. Their discovery and first publication through the archaeologist Ernst Herzfeld was a groundbreaking landmark for the entire discipline. Herzfeld did not only produce one of the first systematic archaeological catalogues of a coherent object group, but he also set out for a first comprehensive stylistic interpretation. His succinct analysis of the 3 stucco styles, especially the famous beveled style, with its characteristic slant style of carving, and our objects here are all in the beveled style, profoundly influenced all future assessments on the development of Islamic art. Even now, 100 years later, his analysis forms more or less the basis of countless handbooks and university courses, and Samara C, or with Herzfeld first style, is still considered with many to represent the genesis of a remarkable stylistic revolution, the birth of the arabesque and the formation of a distinct new art style under the Abbasids, which for many people still holds as the beginning of true Islamic art. However, new stucco finds at other Abbasid sites, especially in northern Syria, re-examinations of the stucco panels in the Berlin Museum, but above all, different interests and new ways of looking at objects and style call for a serious reconsideration of this entire material group. In the following paper, I will therefore not try and analyze the specifics of the full ornamental Samara stucco program. I mean, there are many people who can do this much better. but rather disentangle the narrative which until now has dominated the history of the Samara stucco decoration and touch upon the difficulties involved in studying this group. This is why I will have to start with Herzfeld. By today, the Samara excavations from the years 1911 to 1913 have become very much a legend on their own. Certainly, they are established as the first scientific excavations of an Islamic site, this is at least the German version, and mark the beginning of a large-scale archaeological research on Islamic antiquities. In 2 long campaigns, Ernst Herzfeld, who was a Middle Eastern archaeologist by training, uncovered what was one of the largest archaeological ruins in the Middle East, and which is still true today. Judging from today's standards, he carried out a colossal research program, and obviously not always to his pleasure. He often complained about his colleague Friedrich Sarre, the museum director, sitting in Berlin, rather than helping on the dig. Herzfeld excavated 19 sites, amongst this the main Caliphal palace, the Dar al-Khalifa, then the Palace Balquara, the Qasr al-Ashik, the Qubat al-Sulaybiyah, the 2 large congregational mosques, as well as 14 residential houses. Of course, Herzfeld was not only, and maybe not even mainly, interested in the stucco. He was interested in the architecture and the urban history. Samara was not a typical city. It was founded as a royal base and a military encampment, and only existed as long as the caliph and his army stayed in town. But very soon he discovered that all of the palaces, as well as the residential houses, were lavishly decorated with stucco revetments, and was mesmerized by the stupendous corpus of material which he reserved to study himself. And this is just a view of the Balquara site, and these are a couple of stuccos from some of the residential houses. At the same time, he was also pleased to have found something to take back to Berlin, being fully aware that he was to be measured in the number of valuable finds which were seen fit for the new exhibition in the museum. And we have to think about this now. The stucco revetments clearly appeared to be most desirable, and to quote Herzfeld, "I can say with complete confidence we can excavate as much as we want of these things. One can fill complete rooms and museums with it." And a little bit later, those ingenious niches of the Balquara, it's not those actually, would be suited magnificently for the display of single objects, the wall surfaces in between to hang objects. I can imagine something just beautiful and novel. In fact, the fate of the Samara finds then was, as some of you know, quite different to what Herzfeld had ever imagined. While the first lot had actually been shipped to Berlin and Istanbul, a second lot had remained in Samara and fell into the hands of the British officers in World War I. The political situation changed, who sent it to London, where it was eventually split up and distributed. This is why you can find Herzfeld's excavation finds all around the world. The around 90-something Samara stucco panels in our museum belong to the first lot. And I must say that many of them are actually casts. The second lot, which went to London, did not include any stucco except for some smaller fragments. Despite this, for Herzfeld, rather unpleasant development, his publication on the stucco came out in 1923. Initially, he had planned to publish the stucco in a special volume on the private houses and their ornamentation. However, the Wandschmuck then appeared as a strict classificatory work in which he arranged the stucco in 3 styles, but without closer reference where they came from. So this is probably, you all know this by heart because you learned this in your first course. And of course, on the top is the first style of Herzfeld, is the slant style. It is this distinct slant cut of carving that never produces cast shadows, but only shade. And it is the other special thing is it's dominated by the principle of totally covering the field, the perfect horror vacui. So it's first Herzfeld first style, later relabeled by Cresswell as number C, and I come back to this. And then you have the feature of style 2, which is a richly developed plant compositions as well, but no arabesques and no stalks, and therefore no plant growth. And then finally you have style 3, Herzfeld, style A, Cresswell, which is distinguished by the vine ornament. I must say, in my study days, 2 and 3, or B and A, I never could really distinguish. Herzfeld's concise analysis was accompanied by his incredibly beautiful drawings, which certainly underlined the ornamental character of the wall decorations, and in a way contributed that the stucco decorations were mainly seen as a design. But the excavation of stucco panels from Samara, of course, did not stop with Herzfeld's campaign. And we have to bear in mind that despite his enormous work, he had only uncovered a tiny percentage of this entire site. On the contrary, many more stucco revetments were revealed by the Iraqi Directorate General of Antiquities, and these are scans of photocopies of a book, which exists not in Berlin, unfortunately, and they started in 1936. So you can see some of it is from the Palace al-Huwaysilat, and then in the 1970s, large-scale excavations and conservations were undertaken again by the Iraqi Antiquities Department, and you can see here 4 pictures which look very contemporary, but were actually taken in the 80s and generously provided by Alistair Northedge and by Margrethe van Es, who's working in the German Institute in Baghdad, and I have no pictures of how Samara looks today. Herzfeld's catalog has become an extremely useful tool for any further classification. You can look up panels, such as the ones from the Doha Museum, which of course are not from Herzfeld's excavation, but are, as I am understood, acquisitions from the former Humesi collection. As you can see very well, all 3 are cut in the distinct slant Samara style 1 or Cresswell C, and at least SW86 and SW15 belong to the same decoration. SW85, of course, one recognizes easily. It comes as one of the ornament versions, which is particularly popular with door frames. Herzfeld describes it as a section, and you now have to listen to this, of an intermittent wave line composed out of blossoms in the form of vases. I mean, it sounds really very difficult. In English, in German, it sounds very erudite. What it basically means that it is cut out of what has to be perceived as a large repetitive ornament. The other 2 evidently belong to one and the same scheme. There is, in fact, no overall comparable pattern in the Herzfeld catalog, except for this 1 star design. But it is easy to detect lots of comparative details, these little palmettes and this little string of pearls. Thanks to the later post-Herzfeld, Samara Herzfeld excavations, however, the stucco repertoire has been greatly expanded, which is why it was possible to find quite a good equivalent also for those. And you can see here a very similar panel excavated by the Antiquity Department of Iraq in the 70s. Our SW86 panel just has to be turned around, and one very nicely also recognized another fragment, again belonging to the same scheme, now in Copenhagen. And I was very happy I found this out before I came to Doha. However, Herzfeld's analysis is completely ahistorical and completely non-chronological. It is a little bit an Owen Jones grammar of the ornament, a wallpaper catalog of which to choose your favorite design, the bevel style group, of course, being the top choice. If one just looks at design, it consequently is a natural step to look from the stucco design into other media design, and I think everyone knows the narrative, and also from Samara design to the rest of the Abbasid world design, and this is surely the narrative which later scholars such as Richard Ettinghausen and Ernst Kühnel contributed greatly to, where the discussions on where the design came from, Sasanian seals, Turkish belts, such as Central Asian horse fittings, and where it went to Egypt, Syria, Central Asia. And this is, of course, also where the question of the Abbasid identity comes in. The preoccupation with the design also entailed the discussion of how the design was originally produced, and this is where the notion of the mold came in. Again, something which has been repeated over the years in most handbooks of Islamic art. No doubt, the large spaces with the same repetitive patterns, such here as in the palace of Balquara, prompted Herzfeld to conclude that style 1, Creswell style C, must have been produced with some kind of mechanical assistance which would facilitate the entire decoration procedure and above all would help the workmen to speed up their labor. After all, there was lots to be done in Samara, which grew by hour. In one way, Herzfeld's ideas about the molds were astonishingly specific. He assumed that a master mold was made out of a wooden plank from which one took off the form in a clay, baked this in clay, and from it cast the stucco ornament. On the other hand, he remained amazingly obscure. He never mentioned how he imagined the molds to look like, what was their size, nor did he ever make clear how he actually imagined the actual application process to be. For sure, Herzfeld was aware of molded Sasanian stuccos, but of course these are square and completely different to what is found in Samara. Looking very carefully at the Samara stucco panels themselves, and this has been done in Berlin actually for many years, and Jens Kröger already published on this, but Volkmar Enderlein did this, and we are not re-observing. But it is actually very hard to find anything which betrays the use of molds on stucco. On the contrary, if you look very carefully, and I don't have very good photographs, this is, of course, you see this here. If you look very carefully at the designs, you will detect that not one single design element comes twice exactly. You can see this. I mean, if you do 1-to-1, I mean, it's not the same, which it should had a mold been applied. And this is even these are not molds. You see, I mean, they are next to each other basically. I mean, it's not being produced with a mold. Also, a preliminary glance at the various stucco decoration programs of the different residential units reveals, as a matter of fact, that no design seems to be actually been repeated. So what is the use of a mold? A mold for one room or for one wall? The only place where this mold question has been examined in more detail is in Kharab Siyar, and I show you just a few examples of the stucco which has been excavated there. This is a small city site in northern Syria near the Turkish border, which was excavated by the Frankfurt University in conjunction with the Bronze Age tell, and which is dated, in fact, also due to its stucco finds a little bit post-Samara. In Kharab Siyar, again, no signs of mold production were recognized whatsoever. Much rather, the excavators were able to identify grid systems on the panel, which obviously helped to organize the workmen with the layout of the complicated patterns. The results of these are, of course, very important and will be published by the excavators very soon. So now you have altogether a much more clearer picture of the entire procedure. So you have the gypsum, which was a plate in various coats on the mud brick walls, and then the final coat probably being smoothed. Then the decoration was cut, probably with the help of a grid system, in the slightly wet material. Of course, an ingenious way to disguise the humble building material. Herzfeld's and also later authors' preoccupation with design certainly was to the detriment of the context, but it is the context which is much more interesting today. It is only from few fragments mentioned in the publication that we know that stucco in Samara was not only found in walls, but obviously on ceilings. It was not only found inside residential architecture, but also inside mosques. Most stucco seems to have been part of the interior decoration, but some was more interior than others. And this, of course, has repercussions on the visibility of the decoration and their light and shadow play. And also there is another German essay which has been published in the 70s by Rudolf Schneider in an obscure Iranian art conference, and who was already discussing this. It was just in German. And then also, how were the stucco programs distributed on one side? It is only from the Syrian town Araqqa the early Abbasid capital in northern Syria under Harun al-Rashid, which was excavated in the 80s by Michael Meinecke, that we have a more detailed picture about the exact original locations of these panels, where they clearly emphasized the reception rooms. But here, stucco came all in narrow bands along the doorways and never covered entire wall spaces. Exception are a couple of mihrabs. One of the important questions is, of course, how did the stucco relate to the other wall decorations, the paintings, the stone, the wood, etc. And I would like to dwell upon just one single aspect of this complex, which is whether the Samara stucco actually had been colored or not, a topic which is presently also being discussed for other sites, that as 2 years ago on the Nasrid stuccos of the Alhambra or Martina Ruggieri for the Ghaznavid marbles and stuccos. In both sites, the pure white decorations, as we always imagined them, had indeed been polychrome originally. In fact, one could picture polychrome stucco in Samara very well. After all, the former Abbasid capital was full with color. Palaces and houses were decorated with lavish wall paintings in shades of blue, green, red, yellow, brown, also brilliant gold. Some of these colors have been analyzed by the Victorian Albert Museum in 2006. Wood was decorated with colorful ornaments, and I thought you might be happy to actually see the original because Herzfeld paintings look a little bit different. And here, this wood on the far side is actually all in red. I mean, you see it when you have a normal wood next to you. It's quietschrot, it's very red. And tile work and mosaic were colored. And even the marble existed in various shades of gray, green, and rose. In fact, the slide on the far out is it's actually a vessel, but still, I mean, it shows sort of the colors used in stone as well. Let alone the masses of these so often mentioned but long disappeared sumptuous textiles and draperies, which were used to cover the walls and the floors. Equally Raqqa, and I'm really sorry I haven't got proper color photographs of this, but it was not as white gray ochre as it presents itself today. Excavations yielded colored wall and floor painting, colored wood and colored glass, both for the windows and, as shown here, for the floor. So this is the Salomon Queen Sheba water decoration type, where one obviously was walking like Queen Sheba. But what about the Samara stucco? While there is undeniably some evidence for polychrome Mesopotamian stucco from the Parthian and the Sasanian period, the evidence for Samara, but also the other Abbasid sites, is extremely sparse. The Samara panels in Berlin, unfortunately, haven't been very helpful so far, and we just to re-examine the entire material once more. One of the small remaining pieces with a few color strokes, and this is a serious piece of museum lore, was evidently the work of Kühne, who had tried to emphasize color intensity, as he apparently also did with some of the earlier Sasanian material. Herzfeld himself noted but a few drops of color in red and blue in some of the holes. One of the Doha panels shows some very faint red, and I think it should be analyzed. The only exception is the camel frieze from the Jausak Palace, which reveals blue as background and red and black with the eyes. From Raqqa, a stucco inscription panel is reported, but not published, again, apparently with blue as background. Looking at the Raqqa stucco, however, one actually recognizes a distinct use of whitewash rather than color, which has been applied both to the stucco as full, like the grapes, and also apparently to highlight certain features, such as the stalks of the leaves of the pomegranate. And in fact, here, a second look at some of the smaller Samara material, our large ones are rather gray than white or anything, again revealed that the same observation, the stucco had evidently been whitened as well. And I was told that the same had been observed for the stucco from Harab Siyar, and this is the only place where a conservator was with the excavation who actually looked at the stucco. If this is true, this would of course have extremely interesting implications, suggesting that the stucco probably imitated marble rather than the other way around, as has been suggested before, because of course we only have little marble and lots of stucco. Its face shines white and its light rises radiant is the beginning of a poem by al-Bukhtari celebrating one of the Samara palaces. Of course, we then have to decide whether the marble was indeed white or not, rather polychrome, as let's say in Razna. We also have to think about whether the binary white versus polychrome distinction makes sense at all. Oh yeah, this is two of the marble from our collection. As the last part of this paper, I would like to touch upon one more topic, which is also generally taken over in the handbooks on Islamic art without being, thought out a lot. And this is the date of the 3 styles of Samara. It touches upon relevant questions such as, did the bevel style become fashionable at a certain moment and possibly for a specific reason? Was it even the invention of or for a single person? This is what basically Thomas Leisten has recently suggested in a paper given at this year's conference on Samara in Berlin. And I also touch upon the subject because it shows very well the difficulties involved for everyone looking at Samara stucco. And one wonders whether it would not be much easier to start new excavations. As for the dates, there were different opinions right from the beginning. While Herzfeld believed the styles to be more or less contemporary, so you have 1, 2, 3, Creswell assumed them to be in a chronological order, which is why, of course, he relabels them. This is, A, B being the beginning, and C being the apogee. And this is, of course, how it is generally being taught today in every class. So C is the development out of A and B. And here, if we want to speak about dating, I have noted down the Samara protagonists because probably you won't have them all in your mind. Samara, I think, had 7 caliphs who reigned in this period, but really there were only 3 people who were noted for their building activities, and the first one is the Caliph al-Mutassim, who's of course the first one, is the one who founded the first place. He built the large Dar al-Khalifa, the Jawzak Palace, and probably also the al-Huwaysilat. Then there is his son, not so important, al-Wathiq, who built the palace of al-Haruni, but otherwise not very known. And then, of course, you have al-Mutawakkil, this controversial politician with an independent mind, great lover of poetry and music, and above all, a building maniac, Thomas Leisten's favorite for introducing the new architecture cum decoration style. And here you see the site of the palace of al-Balkuwara, entirely decorated in the bevel style C, of course in favor for the Creswell-Leisten argument. It was built, we know, it was built by Mutawakkil for his son. Their famous circumcision party took place here. And, it's one style, one person, very nice. But then you have style C from the Dar al-Khalifa. These are old pictures from Gertrude Bell, who was there before Herzfeld. And so you see, it's very difficult to assess. If you you would expect style A, for example. But of course, there have been many renovations. And also Fatma Dahmani in Paris, who just finishes her PhD with Alistair Norsage on the Samara paintings, thinks that all the wall paintings in the palace actually come from the Mutawakkil period. Then the private houses, of which most of the Berlin panels come from, actually a little nightmare. Several attempts have been made to relocate the Berlin panels to their original location, starting from Jens Kröger in the past, and I think Thomas Leisten had an attempt when he published the architecture volume on Samara, but then prudently decided not to go into detail, and we now have started to look at it again. At least it was possible to establish a preliminary list of the distributions of the various styles within the houses, and there were 2 houses with style A, B, C, 4 houses with style B and C, and the other always with 1 style. So this again makes people opt for the Herzfeld's option, all 3 together, so they have to be contemporary. But as you can already see here now, and these very difficult slides from the early Iraqi excavations, life is not so easy. And again, what Hertzfeld did not document very well were the renovation of the houses. So if you look at some of the old photographs, and also later, you only see it on photographs, are things like this style C covering A, pro Creswell. So you can see that, of course, actually the whole layer has been getting up. You know, before the floor was down, where you see the floor down, and then it was all covered, and the houses were rebuilt, and there was a new decoration applied over. And you see, in fact, the decoration style A is very much in the Harun Rashid Raqqa style. But then you also have style C over style C, and here once more you have style C over style C. And of course the point is that we will never know anything about all the other renovations which took place that have been photographed. So we cannot really use these houses as any evidence, and this is, as Jens Kröger, our stucco specialist, Abul Juz, has probably would say, nothing is certain. I personally think very cautiously for the Creswell-Leiston version, especially since it all matches so well with Mutawakkil's biography as an ardent architectural patron, and yes, from my mouth, archaeology is not everything in life. But then one hasn't solved Raqqa. While of course we have seen the nice early Harun al-Rashid stucco bands with the wine, there also are the famous beveled-style capitals from Raqqa. And in addition, fragments of a bevel-style stucco mihrab that has been excavated in the Great Mosque. Until now, these were always ascribed to, because of course it's post-Harun Rashid, so they were ascribed to Mutassim, who himself had been to Raqqa before coming to Samara. If, however, it is Mutawakkil, then we definitely have a problem in Raqqa, and to establish a new period with building activities for Raqqa, which at least from the historical perspective has until now not been identified. I have now touched upon just a few aspects which I think are important when studying the stucco from Samara, and left out others which are as crucial, including the very old question as to how and why these magnificent stucco schemes evolved in the first place. But I certainly believe that rather than establishing pure design connection, it needs to look at the stucco in a much more comprehensive, context-orientated way. And I close with this pastiche, which I hope Hertzfeld will forgive me. Of course, I think Samara decoration was very specific, and if one ever solves the inspiration of the riddle for the stucco, one will discover that the inspiration was intended to be meaningful. So I will close with the saying that, I think it's definitely worthwhile to have a fresh look at old sites. It would, however, afford some boring detail archaeology and archival work, and some more historically orientated concept, and that will also get more structure in the Abbasid identity. Thank you very much.